Hello?
Hi.
Hey.
Hey. How you doing?
Hey, Neil.
Hey, Takia. Hey, Jametta. Hey, Ashley.
Hi, good to see you.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for the invite.
Hello.
Hey, Doc, can you hear me? You can start when you're ready. Give it like 2 more minutes, 2 more minutes.
Greetings, everyone. I want to welcome you to our first ITIL preservation panel. I am Dr. Ariana Marshall, co-founder of Dr. Gabrielle Hutchins, which you will hear from in the panel. We wanted to start with first just sharing with you a little bit about our mission, which definitely we're going to delve into in the panel. So through proper organization of our records, we definitely believe that we can raise awareness of the importance of our heritage. Accurate preservation of what we've learned from the past is key to our present vitality and generational thriving. ITIL preservation will not only keep our history alive, but teach future generations about our rich history and empower inaccurately represented minorities incite communities to intellectually and financially to succeed. ITIL preservation is vital to the survival of our stories and our culture. So I want to introduce the moderator for you, Dr. Ashley Preston. Dr. Ashley Robertson Preston is an author, curator, and currently a lecturer in African American Studies at the University of Florida. She's a proud graduate of Howard University, where she studied African diaspora history. Her past positions include serving as director of the Mary McLeod Bethune Foundation, National Historic Landmark at Bethune-Cookman University, while she also was an archives technician for the National Archives for Black Women's History at the Mary McLeod Bethune Council House National Historic Site. She's also the author of Mary McLeod Bethune in Florida, Bringing Social Justice to the Sunshine State. Dr. Preston is passionate about history, and she believes that preserving it is just as important as sharing it. So welcoming our moderator. Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here tonight. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelist, Dr. Gabrielle Hutchins. Dr. Hutchins is a native of Chicago, Illinois, by way of Palm Bay, Florida. She specializes in U.S. labor history, African American, Caribbean, and Latin American history, with over 10 years of professional experience in the field of archival science, museums, and public history. She is the founder of ITIL Preservation, designed to help museums, local archives, small businesses, and families organize their records in a way in which ensures the retention of memories. She earned her Doctorate of Philosophy degree in Caribbean and Latin American history from Howard University in 2015. Her research focuses on West Indian migrant farm workers in the United States. Dr. Hutchins also pursued her studies at Florida A&M University, where she earned a BS in political science in 2009 and an MA in history in 2010. Her philosophies are based on the premise of making a connection between the historian, the archivist, and the community. We also have Dr. Takia Anthony. Dr. Takia Anthony is an associate professor of history and SESCA academic support liaison at Kentucky State University. Her areas of expertise are mobilized African diaspora and archiving. She has lectured and spoken on panels throughout the United States, South Korea, and the Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, Colombia, London, and Ghana, and also curated the archival records of the James Weldon Johnson branch of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. Dr. Anthony has published several articles, book chapters, and a historical spoken word album titled Dr. Takia Speaks, The Inception. Her most recent publication is a book titled The Universal Ethiopian Students Association, 1927 to 1948, Mobilizing Diaspora. This research expands the study of the African diaspora by illuminating the mobilized diaspora and the UESA. As a current 2019 to 21 Duke NCCU Digital Humanities Fellow, Dr. Anthony's forthcoming project is a digital history titled The Pioneers, A History of North Carolina Central University. Dr. Anthony is a native of Bowling Green, Kentucky. Kentucky is where she is the first African-American woman to earn a PhD in history. She is also an alumna of Howard University in Washington, D.C., and North Carolina Central University, where she was inducted into the 2016 class of 40 under 40. Welcome, Dr. Anthony, and also welcome Dr. Hutchins, and also welcome Dr. Jametta Davis. She is a historian, an educator, and a facilitator with experience in archives and records and information management. She's the principal owner of New Narratives, a cultural education company that highlights the power of stories and untold narratives to develop creative solutions for individuals, communities, and organizations. She is also the co-founder of Change Enterprises, a nonprofit that focuses on youth empowerment initiatives. As an actor with District Community Playback, she combines her interests in storytelling and cultural arts to engage audiences and to promote healing. She is a graduate of Old Dominion University, North Carolina Central University, and Howard University, where she earned her PhD in history. So we have some exciting panelists. As you can already hear, they've done great things, written articles, books, and they're doing public history as we speak. And so we're gonna start right off with our first question. And I would also like to say that this program, as we started with, is hosted by Atoll Preservation. And please go visit their website. If you could put the website down in the chat, our founders are right here to put that in the chat, so that if you're interested in learning more as we continue this conversation, you can feel free to visit their website and definitely connect with them on social media and all of their various avenues. The first question we're going to start with is, what inspired you to become involved in preservation?
Well, I guess I'll go first. What inspired me actually was my first internship at the Meek Eton Black Archives, Black History Museum located on Florida A&M University's campus. Woohoo, FAMU. And just walking through the museum every day, offering tours, learning about the different exhibitions between the FAMU Hospital and FAMU Athletics, Blacks in the Church, Black history within the church. I fell in love with just being in that building itself and what it represented. And I wanted to find out more of how I can be a part of not only this legacy that we have, but just you know, the ins and outs, or the art of archiving. How do we preserve this and keep the story going? So that's how I started, in a nutshell.
I'll go next if that's okay. To be honest, I came into public history and archiving fairly late in my career. As a student, an undergraduate student at North Carolina Central, we were just starting to have the conversation about public history when I was there. So I was kind of introduced to it in that regard, but really didn't dive into it until I got to Howard University. And in that sense, I was really inspired by learning more about Dr. Dorothy Porter Wesley. And understanding how influential she was, not only to the art of archiving and preserving Black stories, but also to sharing the information with various scholars on campus to make sure that they're writing the history. And I understood, like, wow, she's a gatekeeper. You know, she not only is she collecting the information, but she's sharing with her colleagues and making sure that they're writing the information that she's preserving so that we can build the field. And once I learned about the work that she was doing, I became inspired and said, wow, I would like to walk in those footsteps if possible. I don't know if anyone can feel the footsteps of Dorothy Porter Wesley, but I will definitely try my hardest as possible. So that's how I became interested and influenced by public history and archiving specifically.
I think my interest in preservation came really young. When I was growing up in New York City, I used to be involved in a lot of different programs where as youth, we explored our African-American history. What were the things that we did in that city? And so, you know, as I got older and it was time to go to graduate school, it was a thing of, okay, all of this knowledge is here in the academy, but this is a powerful tool right here. Imagine how many people you empower once you provide this information to the public, to the communities. These are the people that really need to hear it. So that is why I've continued the route of public history, just because I know that just thinking about my own childhood and how it inspired me and led me to become, a graduate of Howard, because, those stories that I was hearing from my family, those tours that I was taking as a kid, and I wanted to continue that. I think that that's something that we definitely need to preserve and also share outside of the academic community.
And if you didn't listen to the bios, I will repeat that all of the people on this panel are graduates of the Howard University. And if you really look at the field of public history and preservation overall, and that public history program at Howard University, it has really played a crucial role in sustaining public history and just continuing this work. And so, it's great that we all have been able to be a part of that and are in the field continuing that work. And I started my journey at Howard. Dr. Clark Lewis told me to go volunteer at the archives, and I went to volunteer, and it turned into a whole passion. And so, although all of our journeys are different, we all ended up in the same place. And so my question for you all, as you have continued this journey as an archivist, do you feel that there are unique challenges that you have faced as an African-American archivist? What's been your experience archiving while Black?
I'll go first. So I sometimes, if I visit, for example, a predominantly white institution, archives, I do feel out of place. And in terms of just the archivist that's asking, what records are you looking for? And I explain to them my topic. It's like, oh, we have that, or what are you, why are you researching, for example, history of lynchings or something? But the what's uncomfortable is not only just having this conversation of questioning what I'm researching, but the fact that they might not have these records when they should, or, so seeing what this institution deems valuable, I would say it makes things a little uncomfortable. And also, for example, looking through the catalog, you see the use of language of how they describe us in these records a little uncomfortable. So that's just a sample of some of my experiences. And also international visits to archives, seeing the difference in terms of how records are managed. What about you, Takia, Dr. Anthony?
I would have to look, definitely let's talk about the international. I recently went to Ghana last January and did some I guess, partner teaching, if you will, at some of the museums. We went to the George Padmore Library, which is Ghana's national library, and then Dr. W.B. Du Bois' house, where his latter part of his archives are located. And just the preservation internationally that I saw in Ghana really needs more resources, and it really needs help. And so trying to train the students in those spaces, how to preserve, the best ways to think about how to preserve information in a tropical climate, because we totally understand how the climate can play a part in the deterioration of resources and materials. And so making sure that they understood that the best way that we could, and especially with the lack of resources, I have had a positive experience in that regard. I have had a negative experience when it comes to archiving outside of our institutions, where, like you were saying, a lot of people question my PhD and my expertise. They question why I would categorize certain things a certain way, or how I'm organizing collections, as if I did not get trained, and make disparaging comments sometimes. Oh, well, that's a Howard education, not a Harvard education, and those types of things. And I got that when I was in London, specifically. And so just having to deal with the discrimination of dealing with the archives and being a professional. And then on top of that, when you add gender on top of that, and being a Black woman trying to enter these spaces that are male dominated sometimes, those can be difficult too. So it's very important that we build our community, and make sure that we are creating and encouraging Black archivists, because we have to be in these spaces, because sometimes that's where the research is.
I totally agree with Dr. Anthony. Most of my archival experience is in government archives. And in that situation, we're faced where there's not a lot of archivists of color. There are not a lot of Black women archivists in my experience where I've worked. And to be the one sitting at the table, you see a lot of things going on. And there's a lot of fights that if you're the only one at the table, you have to make sure you are fighting for those Black records. One of the areas that I worked in was appraisal, being responsible for bringing records into an institution. And, you know, from my aspect and my way of thinking of the importance of Black records, there are records where I was like, hold on, wait a minute. What do you mean we don't want these records? We definitely have to get these records, because these records, you know, tell us about this experience. These people might need to, you know, have a lawsuit or something one day. Like, these records have to be here. And if I had not been at the table, or if my peers had not been at the table, those records would have not come into the institution for our researchers to be able to see one day. So having that knowledge, I think, is important. Having that representation in our archives to fight for those records, and then also having the records there available for everyone to access, especially our people to access when they need them. I mean, we could talk about this topic all day long with, you know, how people request records and how they're treated based off of the color of their skin, versus others who request other records, or the digitization of our records. You know, some records are digitized faster than records that, you know, talk about the Black experience. So that's an issue.
Also, to add to Dr. Davis, an issue of the government not being transparent in terms of how we're presenting our records. Some records that we don't have access to, everything strictly confidential or whatnot. And for what though? What reason do you have to keep hold of you know, certain parts of our history? And I would say to make you feel comfortable. So like Jametta said, we only dish out, the government only dishes out certain things or collects certain records, but it doesn't cover the whole story of the you know, American heritage, American history. When I say the whole story, I mean not just whites, just underrepresented communities. So I agree with you, Jametta.
So you all kind of answered one of the next questions that I had, as far as Black representation in archives and why it's important. And so I'm going to ask you, how do we cultivate this love for preservation amongst young people? How do we bring, because it sounds like, as we're here doing this work, we understand that representation is important. We understand that we have to be there to have our stories told truthfully, to share those records in a way that they can be accessible. So how do we encourage more young people to come into this, to bring them in as someone brought us in?
Can I jump in? I think one of the main things for myself, and something that I tell my students all the time, and now that I have nieces and nephews who are young, interviews are extremely important, and they are primary resources. And prior to COVID, during Thanksgiving, I was the one in the family who would put a recorder in the middle of the table at the centerpiece and just record and ask questions. And it started with my great grandparents, and now it's my grandparents and their generation, the brothers and the sisters, the aunts and uncles, and collect those stories and make the youth sit down and listen. And you can turn off the TV, get off the phone, get off Facebook. That's gonna be there when we get finished. But we're gonna sit here and listen to how grandma desegregated the school system in Broward County in Florida. We're gonna sit here and listen to the stories of Uncle David while he was in Vietnam and why he got sent to Vietnam, right? And so those are important. And now it's to the point where I've been doing it for so long. Now it's to the point where they don't look at me funny, the family. They anticipate it. They come to Thanksgiving and the family reunions excited about talking and telling the stories. They'll come with batteries for a recorder and with the phone, and they're ready now to share those stories, which is now I'm so excited to be back home in Kentucky, at Kentucky State, our HBCU, so I can now transcribe these interviews and donate them to our archive. The largest African American repository in the state is held at Kentucky State, and can assist in building that and adding to African American stories from the state of Kentucky. So that's one thing that I would do. Make the students or your family or whomever sit down with the elders and do interviews and transcribe them and donate them to get them interested in archiving and preserving history.
I think why does Black representation matter? I think if I had to say it, a message to the students, I believe it's a form of social justice. If we come in control of the narrative, right now who's in control is higher up institutions only providing certain funding or opportunities to cater towards them. So for example, I know recently we've seen in the media the issues of taking down the statues and what they represent. So with us being social advocates or advocates for our history, our story, we can help assist with omitting the wrongs, not omitting the wrongs, I'm sorry. Yeah, we can represent and tell our stories. We can identify with these stories. There's two sides to a story. So if we are fighting to take these statues down, or if we keep them, we need to have someone else representing our history as well. And when you think about us living, for example, in the United States and what the United States stands for, you can tell that the underrepresented communities aren't being there's no voice for us. So we have to do it ourselves. So we have to fight for funding. We have to fight for the statues to come down or build a representation of us. And it starts within the community, locally, with like Dr. Anthony said, within ourselves, in the home, with our families. And once we start capturing the truth, we must preserve the truth. And with preserving it comes the representation in these institutions. And as Dr. Davis said, working in the government sector, that's where we come in. And that's the hard part. It is a challenge. So to the students, please apply, go through these programs, get your PhD, and fighting for our history is a form of social justice. And it definitely represents, it keeps our story alive. Go ahead.
So I think of this in several ways as far as how do we get the youth involved. Yes, maybe working with, the public school systems and the social studies departments, working with communities to get, and community organizations to get, kids to come to the archives, or bringing the archives to them. There's specific records that we can take to them and teach them how to investigate a record, how to read a record, and think about what is in here and what might be missing. There might be some gray area, right? Also thinking about kids are smart. They can figure out things pretty fast. So how about us, like Dr. Anthony was saying, so we're all peers. So we see how we're going back and forth with last names, first names, and trying to keep it formal, but I don't know, we might fall off at the end. But also thinking about, these children, their family histories, like Dr. Anthony was saying, having these, these get-togethers where we explore that. Also, their personal histories. What were you thinking about when, January 6th happened? What were you thinking about when you heard your president say such and such? What do you think about Black Lives Matter? That is history. What happened yesterday is history. So we should be recording those stories as well. And also thinking about, we come from an African tradition where the written record isn't necessarily the record, it's the oral tradition. So how do we continue to make sure that the oral history is there as well, and we preserve that? Now, the written record that we do have out there is important, but from, whose perspective is it coming from? From what social status? Did we get the working class? Did we do a bottom-up analysis? So there's a lot of things to think about, when we're dealing with written records. And in the case of certain records that are certain institutions, our voices have been muted for a reason. And the kids also need to understand that. And then when they do that, now we need to go figure out why and where that information is, because it might help us to get some reparations or something in the end, because we are owed our stories.
And with preserving our stories, it's not only artifacts or materials and memorabilia, it's our voices. As you mentioned, oral history, it's the family reunions or the conversations with your grandparents, aunts, uncles, all essential information to not only just keep your story, our stories alive, but your family stories, and breaking it down. So so representation matters, and it's just not only within ourselves, within our home, within our communities, but it works its way up. And I'm glad that you mentioned oral history, because this is the time that we can all take the time within each other with the pandemic going on, is to really see what artifacts that you have within your home, or have these uncomfortable conversations with the grandparents, like, hey, what was it like in the 60s, or how, or the 30s, so this is essential. Go ahead.
So, I think about being a younger person um, and getting involved in history. It really started with my grandmother telling me stories. And I wish that it had been 2021 and I had this iPhone and I could have recorded my grandmother. And so when I'm talking to young people, I always tell them that, you know, you have a record app on your phone. At any time, you can sit down with grandma and record her. So I totally agree with what Dr. Anthony was saying as far as making sure that we're capturing those stories around the dinner table. My auntie used to pull out her camcorder. Y'all remember back in the big camcorders? And she would just sit it down and we would just have dinner. And so now when I go home, you know, I always ask her to take out those tapes and they have my grandmother and my uncles and people that have passed away, you know, so, you know, even then we had a family member that was preserving history and we weren't thinking of it as a big thing, preserving history. We thought of it as, there she goes again with that camcorder. And now we value those things. So I definitely think that those are things we should be thinking about. And also introducing our young people to primary documents, even at an early age, showing them these things so that they can begin to think about them critically. Because a lot of times when students get to college, you know, they have never seen any of this stuff. They believe that Google is the way to answer everything. So, you know, starting with those things are some good ways to get young people involved. And lastly, internships, paid internships. I have one of my old students, she's working on her doctorate now, and she started as a volunteer at the Mary McLeod Bethune home with me. So, you know, such a, we have so many opportunities to just pull them in. My next question is, what is your take on local archives and how they can serve the Black community?
I'll jump in there as a university archivist or on the team of archivists. I think that it is very important to create those connections with the community as well as in my space, because I'm at a university, the alumni, however far reaching they are also the community, the local community, if you will, and their families. And so I think making those connections, one thing that I cannot wait to do, especially when COVID is over, and I'm sure everyone is excited to have homecoming again, you know, especially on campus. I cannot wait until we're able to have homecoming so that I can pitch the idea to administration to have some type of banquet for the alumni so that they can know what the purpose of our archives are, so that they can meet the staff if they have not already, and so that we can set up meetings or interviews with them, especially those who were in school during the civil rights movement and the Black Power movement and some of these pivotal movements, and our elders. And then also to introduce them to donating any type of resources they may have, newspaper clippings, yearbooks, all of that kind of stuff, as well as maybe setting up endowments, like bequeathing funds. You know, that is so important so that we can create our interns and create work study students at the archives to really build it up, build up and out, if you will. And so I think it's extremely important, these types of conversations, because I don't think people understand the significance of what an archives is, right? They just think that's the library and the books are there. And you might have a space where you can put or curate a museum exhibit, especially during homecoming, right? But they don't understand this is where our ancestors lie. This is where people are going to come to visit to tell our story moving forward, or to tell my grandmother's story or my grandfather's story or my mom and dad's story, especially if they're alumnus of Kentucky State University. You know, so I think educating them on the importance of who we are, what we do, the funds that it takes to operate, and the manpower that it takes to operate. I think that is extremely important for the local level and how we can connect.
I think the local archives are an important resource for communities. But I think that they also suffer from oftentimes the lack of funding to catalog the records and other things that are happening, digitization of records, et cetera. So I think it's an important place. It's also an important resource in order to make connections with community. The people in their community who actually trust that particular archives to take in their records. Sometimes we have an issue where there are families that have these records, but they don't necessarily trust giving them to an institution. So if you're going to trust someone, it's probably going to be that local community archives. However, is that local community archives going to have the funding to process the records and to manage the records? And so I think there's a lot of partnerships that need to go on, the community and the individuals, and the community and the archivists to help these archives, because they are a jewel in learning really about what really happened, what really occurred, and telling their own stories.
I agree with you, Dr. Davis. We grow as a community. As we grow as a community, it's important to know that our community history is just as special as anything else. And also from that perspective, so how did this community survive this natural disaster? What do we do to survive? And us looking back on a community-based level, we can obviously study and continue to survive. And also you can understand what is meaningful, what is valuable for that community. So for example, if you come from a family of tomato pickers, historically, like what makes this town special, our farming industry. And when you think of that, there's 20,000 perspectives, from the family life, the worker, the person who's eating tomatoes, to the person who's ordering the workers to pick the tomatoes or whatnot. Just an example, but just how powerful the community is and telling the story from their perspective versus someone from the outside looking in. And I think that the community enduring a connection with their heritage, although we look for professional help to come in and help us, mold our stories or preserve them, I think it's best coming from the person who has experienced it, or who can make that connection with the community, so we can tell our story. So it's important that starting from, because even if you come from the top, they come down to the local archives or libraries and whatnot for this information. So it's how we preserve it, how we tell the story. You get no misinformation or fake news. So.
I just want to say that I'm really happy that you're putting on this program tonight. And I thank you so much for just putting this together, because education, even when I was working in an archive that was at a university, a lot of times the university doesn't even know what is in the archive. They call you for a special event, and when they want you to build some exhibit from scratch, and there should be something down there relating to, and they want you to do it overnight a lot of times, not knowing the amount of work that goes into it. And so, it's just important that we start to not start, but continue to just educate people that, you know, these documents have to have a certain type of treatment. We have to have money that has to be put in this. We can't just put these items in a room and close the door. You know, we have to have staff. It can't just be one person running the archive with no assistance. So, you know, when we talk about these things, you know, we're educating people and helping them to understand that, as you said before, these archives, they are truly jewels. And if we intend for them to be around another 50 years, another 100 years, it starts with these types of investments into the archive and just letting people know. So that's so very important. In your experience, tell us a little bit about the current conditions of Black archives, funding, preservation issues, challenges, just what you can tell us and what we can do to help.
Oh, I'll start. I'll use one of my experiences as an example. When I was conducting research for my dissertation, I traveled to a few archives throughout the Caribbean, and it broke my heart to see, you know, records molded to blend, mesh together, mold, no AC. The fact that they were charging an arm and leg just to take a photograph of a document, but I understand that now, but then I was just like, what, you know? So that is actually one experience I would say that inspired me to get involved in preservation. I want to advocate and advocate for our history through the archives, and just seeing that the archives I was in didn't have funding to buy Mylar film to protect these records or AC or whatnot. They're trying, and those who are doing the research, are we contributing towards the livelihood of this institution? We come down to conduct our research on these records, but what are we doing to give back to the community and their stories? So, and I say that to say, like, not only do we need funding, but also people in the field to learn how to process these records, and just seeing the value in it. I think that's the challenge of getting students or anyone to major in library science or history, and actually making that connection within the archives and museums. So funding is a huge issue. Representation of us telling these stories, representation within conservation. I think making that connection, for example, with STEM majors, like everyone can become an archivist in their own way, whether it's being a math major, you can be you can create a whole new database system for the archive. So hope that answers your question. I went on a whole tangent, but I said all of that to say funding, representation, and just someone to kind of help dismantle, you know, I would say institutional racism is within in the field of archiving and museums, and we have to, you know, fight for it, fight for funding, fight for representation, go to our local governments and petition for these special statues, or this home that needs assistance from the government or grants or whatnot to you know, help restore it. So that's just some ideas. What do you think?
So
Can you re-ask the question one more time, please? I'm sorry, Dr. Davis.
you're fine. You're on mute.
Can you tell us about your experience regarding the current condition of Black archives? And you started a little bit, Dr. Anthony, you were talking about your experience in Ghana, just about the conditions of the archives from your standpoint.
Right. I'm sorry, Dr. Davis. Am I cutting you off?
No, you go ahead, go ahead.
Okay. I think we have to look at this twofold, especially, and I think Dr. Davis made a good point. We are of African descent, so we have to always make sure that not only are we using our resources where we are, but spreading it across the diaspora. And so one thing that I see abroad, whether it be in Africa or when I went to Colombia, or even in Puerto Rico, looking at archives and working with archivists in that regard, though it was challenging in Lusophone speaking countries because I don't fluently speak Spanish. So that language barrier was difficult for me to talk through a translator. But I think the idea of preserving the information was still accepted. Like I said, in Ghana, making sure, and one thing to add to your point, Dr. Hutchins, when I went over, I knew I was going over to do archival work and to do a lot of public history work. So I made sure that I went I took a whole suitcase full of Mylar and white gloves, and the staple removers, and as well as a plastic paper clips, so that they knew, like, because it's one thing to come over, especially like this American, is coming over to help us with our archives and telling us everything that's wrong with what we're doing, right? I didn't want to be that American, and so I made sure that I provided some type of resources, though it was not much. It made it easier for me to train when I said, hey, let's remove these metal paper clips, and here's a box of plastic paper clips that you can use. I think it was received. I think it was received also as a child of the diaspora, to know that when I walked into that area, I needed the permission of the eldest woman before I conducted my business, and that is African tradition, right? I knew that I needed to, if you will, pay my tithe, when I got there. And so the sisters that were outside selling the fabrics and everything, I did not come in like I'm this American who's about to show you how to do whatever. I went and purchased, and I guess donated to the community so that they could get my energy and know that I'm not here to take anything. I'm here to help. You can trust me. And building that trust within the community and giving those resources was extremely, extremely important. And so I think we have to go into that mindset also when we work across the diaspora or work abroad, especially in resources that need a lot of help, because they do. Like Dr. Hutchins said, they have papers that are just molded together, that still have metal. Some might have rubber bands wrapped around it. They're in climates that are not conducive to preservation. There aren't resources, like I said, no white gloves, no Mylar, any of that. And so we have a responsibility, I feel, as Black archivists, to go out into the diaspora to preserve those resources as well, while we're working here in America to make sure our resources are included, right? And that we're not absent, right? And that our stories are included. So there are multiple prongs to the mission that we have when we look outside of, America, and who we are innately as African descendants and how we can help across the diaspora. So that's just my experience. Again, totally different experience when I was in London. I was researching. I was in the archives as a researcher, not necessarily as a worker. And like I mentioned before, it was very discriminating. I was looking at Marcus Garvey's papers. And so the question was, why are you researching this? Why do you want to see this? They took forever to even pull my documents and then to give them to me. So my research was very rushed. And then when I got to the airport, I was detained and they looked through my bags and asked me why I have information about Marcus Garvey. And so even the whole research part. So as a researcher, if I am being detained in the airport about the resources that I have, then you can only imagine what an archivist would have to go through in order to make it available to a researcher. And so that was interesting and very eye-opening. And that's when I knew that Marcus Garvey was the man and he had the master plan, and I was on the right track when it came to doing liberating research and writing liberating stories, because I'm being detained in the airport just for doing research, and so yeah, it can be real out here in these streets, but definitely I don't want to deter anyone from coming into the field and helping to preserve it and helping to continue with the fight on all levels.
So, I think all of you have said, discuss some of the things that we all see in the different archives as far as funding, as far as management of the records. So one of the things that I often see when working with families and communities are the records prior to them even hitting the archives. And so, you have the family historian, the family genealogist, the family archivist who has been saving these records for a long time, but sometimes they're not organized or they have their own understanding of the organization. So I often talk to them about, hey, you know what, one day we're all gonna have to go. And when your kids or your nieces and nephews see this box or these boxes in this attic, are they managed in a way that they either decide, hey, we need to send this to archives, or we need to continue archiving these records, or you know what, this is a whole bunch of junk, I only see a whole bunch of articles, blah, 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 blah. So trying to get those records managed. The other thing I think about in Black archives is the future. How are we preparing the records that we have now? We are in a digital age, and a lot of the records that we see in Black archives or archives in general are letters that we're writing to one another, or other documentation in analog or hard copy format. Now, our stories, where are they taking place now? A lot of them are taking place on social media, on Facebook and Twitter, and all these things that we don't own. So the day they decide to take it down, those stories might get lost. So how are we preserving the information of, how we felt about, this when this happened, or, what we're gonna do, or this Black Lives Matter, event that it was a grassroots thing and we just went out and, did it. So I think about it in those terms. So not only paper records, but also the electronic records and, those, the pictures and other things that we might have. So, there's a lot of things to think about with formats, and, general communities don't often have that understanding of, okay, just throw it in a box and somebody will donate it. How are you managing those records in those different formats, in those different conditions?
Can I add something real quick? I think what you're saying is so important, and just moving the conversation or kind of pivoting to like the university, digital humanities is so important. And we have to jump into Black digital humanities, right? We can't allow our voice not to be heard in these digital spaces. One challenge that I find is a lot of our HBCUs lack the infrastructure to host the bandwidth for these digital spaces. And so when you're looking at creating a digital repository on Omeka, for example, if you don't have the infrastructure to hold Omeka, then you can't move into that digital age, right? And so I think not only do we have to remain progressive with, like you said, the traditional, the paper and the pictures, but we also have to think of ways how to move forward, because like you said, the future is digital. And are we going to, for one, have that space, you know, in our libraries to hold all of the yearbooks? I know we don't have yearbooks anymore, and I don't know why we need to go back to producing yearbooks, because that's important information, important resource. So we definitely need to go back to producing yearbooks on the collegiate level. But the old yearbooks that we do have, you know, making them digital so people can do the research, because our fields begin to deteriorate or fail if we're not producing. There are some people who want to work at HBCUs, myself. There are some people who would prefer an African American studies program, you know, and so how do our fields maintain themselves, right? How does the African diaspora maintain itself if we don't have those resources to publish the books, you know, and create, or the journals, right? And create those fields. So if we're not preserving and then we're not writing, then our departments, you know, aren't productive. And then when they look in at administration to say, oh, well, such and such only has so many majors, let's cut African American studies, or let's cut this, or let's cut that, then now we're falling at every level. And we are the foundation when it comes to archiving, right? And so we have to find ways to move us into the future, so not only to preserve us as archivists, but to preserve our overall field of Black history, Black studies, and all of that across the diaspora as well.
I'll chime in. I agree with you, Dr. Anthony. How can we, the public, rely on the evidence presented? How can we rely on someone else documenting our stories? Major problem in the digital space is the loss of information and the lack of control of the records that we relate to. So, for example, stories coming from the press or academic researchers or auditors, who's to say what they're reading or interpreting, they could write a whole different storyline. So it's definitely important to be involved in these digital spaces, and now more than ever, documenting our movements, like the Black Lives Matter movement. Like, we read about the Black Panthers, but now we have the Black Lives Matter movement. How are we documenting this, you know, this organization, or, you know, this social movement? How are we preserving it so future my future kids can have, oh, mommy, were you involved in the BLM movement? Tell me about it in school. So I think that, you know, I bring this back to us on a local level, really, and just in the home, working towards preserving our history and attacking the issues of misinformation in digital spaces, and fighting against those who think what's important. Just, we need to be the fight. We can't depend on major institutions to fight for us in our stories. And, you know, it's going to take more than just, you know, one or two people. We need more people in the field. I'm begging personally, like we need representation at HBCUs. There, people are trying to take history away in some form or fashion. So that's where we come in. You don't have to be a historian or archivist to fight for your heritage or your identity. So starting, locally fighting and working your way up. So yeah, that's all.
So if you look in the chat, just as a follow-up to what you all were discussing, I left a link for the CLEAR organization. A good friend of mine works at CLEAR. It's the Council on Library and Information Resources. They have some awesome grants right now in which they are encouraging people of color to digitize and to try to, take advantage of some of these funds that are out there. And I would just say, when I first graduated from Howard, of course, anybody who came through the public history program, we were all armed with this ability to write grants, but it was still very intimidating for me. And it wasn't until I came to Bethune-Cookman at the time and realized that there was no money. I was supposed to run the museum, and I was charged with having to also almost run the archives. And there was no money, there was nothing. And so I began to write grants through the IMLS. I secured about $270,000 to hire an archivist and to also create an internship program and those types of things. And so there's so much money out there. And what I would encourage people to do is to really, really try to get involved with some of these grants. Try to really, connect. And the good thing about the grants a lot of times is that they have workshops that will teach you how to really write the grants. I know Mark, I think his name was Isaacson over at IMLS. I mean, when I was working on my first grant, I was able to just call him up and I would ask him about specific parts of the grants because I didn't have a full understanding of what I needed to do. And that particular grant was successful. So, just any avenue, as far as funding that you can find. Earlier, Dr. Anthony talked about opening the archives up to alumni. That's something that, a lot of times people don't value what they don't understand. So if you pull out those yearbooks, if you pull out, those things that people can see and touch, well, maybe not touch, but they can see them, they'll have a better understanding of what's there and why it needs to be protected. And so just as we're looking at archives and, helping people to become more engaged in it, let's just take on that responsibility of, opening it up a little more. And I will say sometimes that with archives, you have things in there that are so special, so rare that you want to kind of keep them to yourself almost. And I know this because a lot of times archivists, they won't part with certain things, but we have to also do a better job at just allowing people in, and training them on how to handle these things. And so I want to ask you all something that we hadn't talked about, but just tell me a little bit about your, just about how you've been able to build trust with people in the community or build trust with people in order to obtain their records and those types of things. Like, how do you go out? Because there is mistrust in the community a lot of times. Someone will hold on to those papers. My auntie, for example, she has some documents that belong to my grandfather, and she let me hold them for one day. She said, you can make a copy of it and bring it back tomorrow. I'm like, where do you think I'm going with this stuff? Because somebody took something and didn't bring it back, or someone took their story and they put it in a book and they didn't give them their credit. So how do we build that trust so that we can continue to help our communities?
Now I'll jump in there. I gave the example of the things I did in Ghana previously, but I think dealing with like local archives and especially university archives, it takes time. It's not going to happen overnight. And you have to be intentional about gaining trust. And you have to know that that's the first step. And so when you meet with someone in the community, or even maybe another archivist at another institution, whoever it is, please understand that your first meeting is not going to be about content. Your first meeting, especially if it's someone in the community, is going to be, well, who are you, where are you from, who are your people, what are you doing, what have you done? Do you know such and such? And, you know, it's definitely one of those I need to get to know you type of meetings first. And it doesn't hurt to definitely have not necessarily a physical resume, but to be able to run down to say, these are some of the things that I've done prior to that you can go back and look at. Like, go back and look at this website. I created that, or I did whatever, or I participated in this regard, something tangible that they can go back and see, so that they know that you are what they say legit, you know, and definitely making sure that you are transparent and authentic with people, because like Dr. Preston said, these are artifacts or papers or some type of resource that has an emotional connection to people sometimes. You know, and to the regular archivist, it might just be a piece of paper, but to them, that is, you know, a part of who their grandfather, their father, or whomever, or it's a pivotal moment in their life. This is when, you know, I first demonstrated with the civil rights movement. This is the first time I heard Dr. King speak, and it has some type of emotional value to them, and you want to cherish that. And it's like someone giving you, you know, their heart. You know, you want to preserve it, you want to cherish it, and you want to prove to them that you will take care of it. And you're going to train the next generation to take care of it once you retire, you know? And so I think those are key things that you have to pay attention to. The first meeting is never a meeting about content. It's always getting to know you meeting.
I agree with Dr. Anthony. I think that's the first step, is really getting to know the community or the person that you are potentially collecting data from. And like she said, bringing that resume or just kind of showing, hey, I'm experienced, but I'm not here just to make a profit. I'm here to tell your story and teach you the value in your history. I know Dr. Preston mentioned, which is a key word, is people don't know or see what's valuable within their homes, from yearbooks to, you know, this family musical album from the 70s, you know, you just don't know the value. And with us teaching them, that's a start. Like, hey, you do realize you have an extensive collection of all you know, all of these, you know, all of these yearbooks, for example. And I noticed that your community has a yearbook printing institution or whatnot. Terrible example, but you get the point. Just making that connection, doing the research, making that connection with the person that you are diving into, preserve the records. And also, from my work experience, I noticed, unfortunately, people don't know what they have, and they just give it away to whomever, you know, without funding, or they donate it, and just no type of coming back to check or follow up on how are my great grandmother's pearls and a whole outfit. She was an activist and such, an you know, during this time. So just seeing the value historically, and that's where I'm sorry, all over the place. Did I even answer the question? My point is definitely getting to know the community and the person in particular, and building that relationship. slowly but surely.
So I totally agree with Dr. Hutchins and Dr. Anthony. The listening, the acknowledging, and the value, acknowledging their value and the value of their belongings. I think the other thing is sometimes there's a saying is, "What is in it for me?" But in looking at what is in it for our archives, we also have to provide a value back, and what is in it for them. And that might be, offering to train, offering workshops on how to get these records, or, where a lot of times the question is, I don't even know where I can send this stuff. Where can I, who wants my materials? So providing those resources to individuals and communities and families to, just help them to get a start. I think that's a good place as well.
And also, I would just say, diving into the meaning of what identity is versus what heritage is. And I say that in terms of just bridging that gap with that individual person's identity, making that connection over how does it represent their heritage across the board.
I hope that you all are taking notes during this conversation. So many jewels. I mean, just so many things to take away as far as, how we can become better at this thing, how we can preserve our future, how we can make sure that everything is being told in a way that's truthful. And so with building trust in the community, that's the first step. As you said, don't show up on day one thinking that you're going to walk away with all of the documents. And surely I know in my work in the archives, a lot of times, people want to do something with this stuff, but they're just not sure. So I hope that, if you're listening to this or watching this, that, you will call grandma or auntie and ask them to possibly make a copy of their documents too. And so my question to you all, and after this question, I'm going to open up the chat. If you have a question in the chat, just type your question in and we can present the question to the panelists. But how can the community preserve their legacy? What are some ways that the community can get involved? People that are, I don't have any training in archives or, whatever, what have you, but this sounds interesting. What's my first step? What can I do?
So I think we touched upon a few of these ways just in the conversation. I've heard, that recorder, that app on your phone, taking pictures, becoming your own documentarian. You do the documentary. We got video, doing collective projects with whether it be with family or with other members of your community to make sure that you have that history. I think those are just a few ways that we get started. And then once we have the materials, then we can figure out a way to put them together to tell that narrative, to tell our narratives.
Just chiming in, we are already doing it with social media as we speak. When we post on the Instagram or the Facebook, we are archiving. It's there forever. And I think where we can start is, as we mentioned earlier, is just in the home, have those uncomfortable conversations with our grandparents or aunts and uncles, and where you can essentially find out, the tea on the family history, but why we are the way we are today. So with that being said, finding out the stories within the home branches out within the community, like how your great grandfather was involved in the march or whatnot. So just having those conversations, asking to see the family photographs, and if you notice any deterioration on them, that's your way of preserving your legacy, is finding out how to preserve that. And I think what you could do locally, you know, we visit the libraries or whatnot, and we do our research as a student, but really diving into talking to the community and gathering the information through having, you know, written, inscribed written statements or whatnot on top of videography. So that's just some ways, but you have any takes, Dr. Anthony?
No, I second everything you guys said. And like Dr. Davis said, I think we kind of touched on it a little bit earlier. So I just, yeah, I reiterate what's already been said.
I would just like to add that earlier you were talking about just sitting down, just sit down and talk. And, you know, I'm finding that a lot of my younger cousins and younger generation, they don't know who the family members are sometimes, or they may know them, but they don't know if it's their cousin or their, I know we're related. And so even with just talking about family and, you know, I love to talk about the photo albums when I go home with my auntie. And so trying to label those photos, that, let me just stop right there. Label your photos some way, your photo albums, because a lot of times what happens is there's somebody in the family that knows everybody that's in that book, and that person passes away, and you end up with a book of beautiful people and you have no names, no, you don't know how they're related, you don't have a clue what was going on in the picture. Everybody's all dressed up to go somewhere, but where? So that's a small thing that we can do as we're, you know, gathering when outside opens back up with our families. You know, start with those photo albums, start with those pictures that are on the walls in those elders' homes, start with making copies of those pictures. When I worked at Bethune and I arrived, there were original photos on the walls. And that was one of the first steps, was taking those photos down, putting them in the archive, you know, and even with us in our homes, many of us have family members who their house has looked the same for 25 years. And that's probably a photo that's been sitting in an album for 25 years. So, you know, just small steps to make sure that those things will be around for the future. Some of the questions that we've been getting, they're asking about this program being made available to the public. And I said that it's being recorded, but where will it be posted, Dr. Hutchins?
I can post it on the YouTube.
On YouTube?
Yes.
Okay.
YouTube and some the website, www.itopreservation.com.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Do we have any other questions? I'm going to go back through. How do we collectively overcome community mistrust, fatigue, and information overload? And also, what are some resources for independent scholars and graduate students?
It's a lot of questions.
Right, I'm trying to think of how to unpeel, like, because that is a loaded question. I think you have to prove trust and go back. It might mean doing some work pro bono if you are, like, if you have your own independent type of preservation services that you're doing. It might mean doing some work pro bono to show, you know, this is who I am, this is my work ethic, this is how I produce. And then from there, after 1 or 2, then maybe adding some type of fee, but that might be, although we want to make sure that we are getting paid for our labor, right? But I know that sometimes with the elders, they'll ask you to do something simple first, just to test you, to see if you really know what you're doing before they give you, the real documents, if you will. So you might have to jump through those hoops with the elders, and you can't get discouraged, and you can't be upset, and you can't have an ego about it. I went to school for X, Y, and Z, and I have a whole PhD, and we have to understand that there is mistrust in our communities. There have been instances where people have come into our communities, taken our information, not given us credit, or misconstrued the story to fit whatever their agenda is. And so people have been burned. And so we have to understand that and come through and make sure that we're seeing this as a healing process as well, with preserving the information. I forgot the second part of the question, but I'll pass on to somebody else.
I think you mentioned the resources. What are some resources for independent scholars and graduates? Did you say that, Ashley? I'm sorry, reading.
Yes.
I would say for sure check your local libraries, archives, in terms of I'm not sure if I'm answering this right either, in terms of resources, but just looking at local record keepers and just seeing what they have out there. Like Ashley mentioned earlier, she submitted information about the iClear grant. Did I say it right?
Clear. Mm-hmm.
Oh, Clear, thank you. And also checking with what the National Archives has. They actually have a lot of resources about not only preservation, but what programs are being offered to educate people about the holdings and opportunities. So, for example, with genealogy, you can check that out. Also, family search, just in general for genealogy, for example. Does anyone else have any other resources?
I think also checking with some of the professional organizations like the Society of American Archivists, ASALH. I mean, there's a lot of organizations that deal with preservation, the National Historic Trust for Preservation. They have some resources online. And also the Public History, National Council of Public History. They have some information as far as archiving and preservation as well. So maybe starting there, and then you can find some other resources as far as books that also talk about the topic. But I think a lot of, if you're interested in it, becoming an archivist or getting in the field, I think one of the best ways to learn is to get that experience and get an internship or volunteer with the community to help them. And that's one great way to learn about how to conduct and manage the records of an archive.
And also make sure that you follow this organization's social media pages. Check out their website, I Told Preservation. They're really doing some great things. And I just have to commend Dr. Hutchins and also Dr. Marshall for creating this. I mean, they have a shirt, Black Archives Matter. I hadn't even thought about something like that. Just putting archive on a shirt and showing, even with that, making people aware that there are archives, yes. And there are things relating to Black people in those archives that we know matter and that we should protect. So follow their social media page, the website. They're doing a lot of great things. How can one acquire such a shirt? please make sure you go to the website. Can you put the website in again? And so we have another question. Yes. Okay, sorry, I thought I heard someone. We have another question. Okay, hey, Dr. Carr. Any ideas on how to channel the use of Black archival materials to Black institutions, connected scholars, memory keepers, etc., and redirect the harvesting of Black institutional memory in support white institution-based scholarship? This question is in the chat from Dr. Carr. How to redirect the harvesting of Black institutional memory. You can see the question if you would like to.
Well, I'll jump in there. Hey, Dr. Carr. I think at an HBCU, right? I think it is very important, like we've been saying, that we have to make sure we know what we have, and we have to make sure we know what other institutions have. We may not be able to acquire the information that they already have, but if it's something similar in our institution, then of course we have to make it appealing to our researchers to say, this is the different spin on, for example, Mary McLeod Bethune, right? Yes, University of Central Florida might have this, but this is what we have at Bethune-Cookman University, for example. And this is the different perspective. And then I think moving forward, like Dr. Davis said, we have to make sure that we have people who are in the room making the decisions, as well as those who are at the auctions, because there are resources, for example, that will go to a non-HBCU that are coming from important African Americans and people who have done great things for the field or for the race or for the gender. And we have to make sure that, for one, we are keeping some type of endowment or foundation so that we can go to these auctions, because I shouldn't have to go to Yale or Cornell to read about Dr. W.B. Du Bois, right? I should be able to go to Howard or the Schomburg, right? I should not have to go to another institution to read about Dorothy Porter Wesley. You know, I should be able to go to Howard, the institution that she worked at, to read about Dorothy Porter Wesley. I should not have to go to another institution to read about our organizations, right? And that's why I say we are the gatekeepers. If we're not collecting and making bids on these collections so that we acquire them, then we have to go through other hoops in order to look at it as researchers. And who's to say we're looking at an entire collection? They put out collections as they want to and reveal what they want to the community or to, you know, to whomever. And then non-Black researchers get the first dibs on the information. Their books come out first, and then we get left with the leftovers, you know, which then perpetuates that whole stereotype that HBCU scholars and HBCUs are lesser than, right? That's not the case. Sometimes we just don't have the resources to get those primary resources in our repositories so that we can have the first stab at writing about whomever it is, right? And so I think that is extremely important, how we raise those funds and how we do that. I think we need a team of people who can fundraise, not only in a traditional sense, not only in the with the grants, but how are we creating an endowment so that we can take $500 million to purchase Charles Wesley's papers, you know, or, you know, somebody's papers. And I think that is number one key. And people who know how to bid, go to the auctions and make sure we're getting those resources first and not the leftovers. I hope I answered your question.
I want to add something to that. We have to really get serious about having conversations with our elders about what they intend to do with their papers once they pass away. Just as we have to have conversations about insurance, you know, what's the plan if something happens? And so when I was at Bethune-Cookman, we went to Dr. Cleo Higgins, who's, I think she's about 97 now. We went to her house and we talked to her about her collection. And, you know, with her being Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune's protege, you know, with her having been the past president of SG Row, you know, we talked to her about the significance. And we started a program called the I think it was the Legacy Keepers historical program, where every year we would induct someone. And when we inducted them, we would make an exhibit, we would make a big deal about it. We had a whole induction, you know, and so she was 94, maybe 93 when all of this was taking place. But we talked to her about it while she still had her good mind, you know, before her son decided to whatever he was going to do with her papers. So we have to literally sometimes go and talk to our elders, go to the church and ask the church, hey, has the church thought about what you all are doing with all of those papers that are just sitting back there? You know, it takes a lot of legwork sometimes that, you know, we wish we didn't have to do this type of thing. We wish that it would be easier. But I think if we do more of that, you know, we will see a better return with those types of things.
Totally agree with everything that has been said. I think that another thing to think about is just promotion, promoting our HBCU archives. When we think of them and using the archives that we have there, there's also an issue of funding. And so right now there's this thing going on, I shouldn't say a thing, but HBCUs are starting to get some money from a few people, these millions of dollars. And I wonder how much of it is going to go to Moreland, how much of it is going to go to Hampton University's archives. So perhaps maybe we need to start a campaign or an initiative where we try to raise the funds for the archives at these institutions. And also in doing so, have a marketing plan, a promotion plan, talking with the scholars that are at the HBCUs to encourage them, to let them know what we have, because there's also a thing where there are records at these archives, at these institutions that have not been processed yet. And so how do we get the money to process the records so that these scholars can use the records to put that research out? So that's, you know, one way of looking at it. But funding is definitely important, as well as promoting our archives.
I agree with you, Dr. Davis, and everybody. I think the persons in the position of power attribute a significantly to the institution, whether it's tangible or intangible representations of our stories. So I think that, you know, not only upper heads, we're getting funding, but how are we funneling it throughout these institutions, and how can we keep our students involved in this field, or get, you know, making that connection with the STEM students and history, MLS, getting people to actually major in it. And from my experience, you know, people seeing, oh, you're a Black archivist, you're a Black this, a Black historian. What do you do with that? What's in archives? Like, that's why representation matters, because you have a person who loves history but don't know what to do with it. And I think that, you know, it definitely, you know, it starts with us, but HBCUs, I'm a product of it, I think, you know, and I'm thankful because it has offered or given me opportunities. I went to school to be a lawyer, and I'm like, I love history, and this is what I could do to help my people. And I think that with these institutions, that's where we definitely can start, because if you think about all the HBCUs around the United States, we can definitely tackle the surrounding community stories and preserve them the right way. So especially someone mentioned researchers coming to take on our stories and writing out, you know, or seeing the goal that we have and using it for a financial gain and not ever coming back to the Meek Etam Black Archives. I got what I need and this is what it is. So I hope that, yeah, go ahead. So that's just my take.
I just want to add one more thing. As we think about how we're going to use the archives, not just thinking of how scholars are going to use it, but we are at a time where our narrative, we are tackling, we are battling, and, we are taking back our narrative. And one way that our narrative is often told or that it gets exposed is through the use of film and other in television and other stories. And there's a lot of Black filmmakers, there's a lot of Black playwrights, there's a lot of Black artists that are doing work. And I think that another way that we should be looking at is promoting the use of archives to tell the stories. The records aren't just at a government facility where you're learning about, the Black Panthers. They're also at these HBCUs as well. So, how do we expose others to the records and how do we use them to share with the wider community, the wider audience?
And I think with preservation is definitely a sense of pride. And so we are already feeling the pride just attending an HBCU, but what can be, so just the history of HBCU itself, like historically, I know FAMU has those records or how FAMU was erected, but people actually understanding like, hey, this is where we come from. This is why this is important. So when you go out into this real world, this is who you're representing. And this is why we need these soldiers out here to protect our history. Because like Dr. Davis said, control the narrative. And thinking about historically it's institutional racism, like nobody ever thought, oh, well, we don't care. We just now getting a Smithsonian Black Museum and Latinx. So underrepresented communities, we all need to fight and to get our story in, because what you see with, for example, with the United States is, what they want you to see. So we need to be able to tell our own story. Like even how for example, the Black Power movement or even civil rights movement, how things quote unquote got shut down or just it's just a one-side story pretty much when it was two beautiful movements. So that's what I have.
So this conversation has been really powerful. Looking at all of the comments, people are saying how much they really enjoyed everything and that they want to continue this work, I hope. And so I just challenge you all, as we leave this virtual space, to really give some thought about preservation, be it your family history, local history. Perhaps you can donate to an organization that is doing this work. Maybe you can take a class on grant writing. Maybe you can just think about going to find grandma's quilt and putting it in a better place rather than keeping it in the storage shed where it's probably going to develop mold or something. Just think about how we can take just one small step towards preserving our history. Because as our panelists have really demonstrated, this is a critical time in our history. This is something that we will read about. We will read about everything that's happening, but what will we read? And will one of us be an elder at that point that we can pull out our notes and say, nope, I wrote about it, or I took a picture. This is what was really happening. So I challenge you all to just continue to preserve. Thank you so much to Atoll Preservation for hosting this conversation. Again, go to their website, follow them on social media, give them some love, purchase a shirt if you would like to. I mean, they have all kinds of stuff on their website. And if you need services, if you're thinking, hey, I really want to preserve something in my home, I have all of this stuff that I don't know what to do with it, call Atoll Preservation and let them come and help you get started. These people are amazing. This is exactly what they do. They've been doing it for over a decade. So thank you all so much. If you would like to offer anything, Dr. Hutchins, we invite you to offer any closing words. As the founder of I Told Preservation, along with Dr. Marshall, thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Preston. You definitely summed idol preservation up in a nutshell, but I genuinely am thankful for the opportunity to spread my love for history and archiving and to work with you all. Thank you all for joining in with us, and I hope that you can take whatever you take from this panel, you'll go out in the world and be the social advocate for our stories. So just in any form or fashion of what you're doing within your careers. And even if it starts with just being in the home, and I'm going to go check that family Bible for the list of names. You just never know what is in your house and the story meanings behind it. So I thank you, and I hope to see everyone in the future events, and preserving, be out there, be the soldier of preservation. So thank you. Oh, someone said, don't forget obituaries. That's right. Check with family obituaries. That actually tells a lot of stories too. And the family, diaries and whatnot, or journals. I don't know if people still journal today, but that's something to check too. But anyways, thank you. No limit. I like it.